Gordon and I are going to share this presentation, but I thought I would start off by telling people a little bit about Make Plus. I think a lot of people at BCIT have no idea who we are, but we are just across Willingdon at Carey Building, and we at Make Plus are a very multidisciplinary team. We work on product and process development and evaluation, so basically taking a concept and bringing it to the point where there's a pre-commercial product. So sometimes this is grant-funded initiatives, other times it's industry-funded, sometimes it's a combination of both. So you'll see up here on the slides, there's a few examples of some sample projects that we've done just to give you a little flavor of what kind of stuff we can do. The first one, it's Bikube. This was a project that was done with BC Women's and Children's, and it essentially is an incubator that mimics the mother's heart rate and respiration rate to provide a really nice nurturing environment for these little preemie babies. Very successful project, and they're just in the process of building a few more now. The second slide is Weave. This was a company that had a concept where you would use your digital camera, the consumer would use their digital camera, take a picture of their foot, and then there was some algorithms that were used to create a shape for an orthotic that could get sent to a 3D printer, and then the consumer ends up with their own customized 3D printed orthotic. And the third picture up here, one of my favorite clients, Purdy's, because we got lots of samples that we had to work with. But the Make Plus team helped them take their chocolate packaging process and turn it into an automated process. So the other thing I want to just quickly mention is we also do a lot of stuff with students. We help them with their capstone projects. We hire them for summer co-op terms. But we also do something called speed dating, not like what it really sounds, but what we do is we have the students come in groups and we tour them around our facility. We talk to them about different parts of the design process, show them a lot about the manufacturing, and we do other sessions where they actually bring their projects to us and we talk to them in small groups about and consult and sort of help them along. So if any of you have students that may be interested in this kind of thing, contact me or anybody else within our group and we'll direct you to Sarah who can organize that, because from what we understand, the students really benefit from that a lot, and it's a great learning experience. So before I get into our project, I thought I'd talk very quickly about our design process. We are certified for ISO 1345, and as part of that, we follow a quality system. So this is a very structured design process that we use consistently. And it not only helps us sort of have a framework for our design, but it's also really important for regulatory approval, especially when you're developing medical devices. So very, very overview slide here, but essentially what we have to do to start is identify what the need is, what the problem is. Then we create a set of detailed design requirements that are basically the outline of the specs for whatever it is we're going to design. We use that to then do some preliminary concepts, then we come into a detailed design phase, then we finally make a prototype, and the final stage we verify and validate this with end users in a real world setting just to make sure this is actually doing what we intend it to do. So the project Bikube that we're going to talk about today is a little bit of background. There was a fellow from France who had a buddy, essentially, an older man who'd been tinkering in his basement, and as this fellow was getting older, he wanted a way of staying active, but at the same time relieving a bit of his body weight, taking a little bit of the aches and pains off of his joints. So he had come up with a preliminary design of this new novel mobility concept, and then our client, when he came over to Canada, he had the idea that he wanted to actually bring this to market, but he realized that there needed to be a little bit of tweaking done to the design. Well, a little tweaking, more than a little tweaking, but he engaged us to help him with that. So our first step is really to identify the need and verify what needs to be done. So we started by looking at the existing devices in the space, starting with canes. So a cane, it does provide a little bit of support, but somebody with a more complex mobility challenge, it's not going to be enough. The next step is really looking at walkers and rollators. And while these provide a little bit more stability, there's some issues. The posture of the person using it is not always fantastic. People need to use their hands to move these things forward. So when they're in the home and they're wanting to do chores, they're very limited by that. And the other big thing is there's a big stigma. A lot of people, as they get older, are very reluctant to move into using a walker or a rollator. They feel it looks old, makes them look old, or it's a bit too medical for their needs or for their wants. So a very common first step for us is to get stakeholder input. Once we kind of identify what the problem is that we're needing to solve, we need to look to the experts to really give us thoughts and feedback on more specifics of the design. So who would be the people using this? How would they be using it? When would they be using it? And what things are important for them with the device? So in this case, our big experts were actually the people with mobility limitations. And we also wanted to get opinions of the healthcare professionals that work with these people. So we held a series of focus groups, and we talked to people about their mobility challenges, things that they wanted to do that they currently couldn't do. We talked to them about the mobility solutions that they were currently using and some of the drawbacks and limitations with that. And then we put the prototype out there, had people use it and provide feedback on the actual design itself. So what was their feedback on, with first impressions of the solution, what did they think could be improved, and what issues did we need to address? So all of the information that we gather from that, we used to create a big table of design requirements. This is just a very, very small sample of what it actually looks like. There's actually several pages of very detailed information, but we wanted to really pin down who is our target user. So in this case, it was people that were in what we call the pre-walker stage. So they needed a little bit of support. They may have some fatigue or back pain, something like that, but they weren't at the stage where they couldn't walk independently. We also wanted feedback on the functionality of this device. So there's trade-offs between the ability to maneuver this thing very well as the stability of the device. Things like getting up close to counters when people were inside the home, which incidentally was part of the criteria that they said this is just going to be an indoor device. And then other things in terms of the wheel placement. So it can't impede stepping, but you still have to be able to move quite freely within it. Talking about the ergonomics, what sort of positioning they needed to be in, adjustability for different sizes of people, not only heights, but also front to back. Lots of talk about braking and wheel locking, and no great consensus there, but interesting feedback that we were able to put into our requirements. And finally, the seat was another thing that people really identified as being important and definitely an issue with the prototype that was developed. So with that information, I will now pass it over to my colleague Gord, who will talk about what we did.
Hi. So the next phase of the project after requirements was the concept phase. And you can see on the slide here that this is what was sketched up by our industrial designer. Speaking of which, there was more on the team than just Joanne and I. There was Lisa Bolton, who was our industrial designer, and Ernie Jansen, who did a lot of the fabrication of the prototype, as well as the design. So when we're developing a project, we actually spend a lot of time on the requirements and the concept phase, because this is sort of the key to having a successful project. Once these two phases, once we're satisfied with them, even though they take the longest, when they're done correctly, the next three phases, detail design, fabrication, and verification, they're relatively easy. So once we get the concept nailed down, we go to the detail design. So usually we do some type of computer modeling of the device, and this allows us to tweak the design before we actually cut any metal or fabricate anything. And we also ensure that parts that we develop ones that we make in-house as well as parts that we buy off the shelf, we can ensure that they all mate with each other and there's not going to be issues with tolerances and so on. So, and we also design it in the way that it can also be manufactured in a production environment. So we don't try to develop something that is almost impossible to make with production machinery. So we always keep that in mind as well. And then we go to the actual fabrication, and so what we like to call, this is a pre-production prototype. So it's something that could be produced in a mass production environment, but generally we just build one-offs. And we like to take a modular approach to our designs, so that way the client, when they're doing field testing, they have a few options to different configurations. And here the configurations are shown with brakes on the device, and the second one is no brakes, and then the third one is no brakes and no handles. So it's totally hands-free. You just use basically your legs and your hips for moving the Bikube around. So you can see here the final result. There's not a lot of differences between what we developed in the concept through to the detailed design and then the actual device itself. So in that way, we can pretty much ensure that there's going to be some degree of success for the client. And this is Lisa Bolton. She's actually on the Bikube itself, and so we just want to thank all the other members of the team that aren't here. And if there's any questions.
And actually, maybe just to end this thing off, just to say where we're at right now. So the client has been delivered with these prototypes, and he's in that verification validation stage. So he's actually going out to different groups of end users, trying all these different configurations, getting consensus about brakes, no brakes, playing around with different seat designs, but likely one more iteration of design before it gets to manufacturing. But that's the end of the story.
Do you have video of someone using one of these?
Well,
Yeah.
there is. I mean,
Can we
Yeah,
call
you've
it up
got
here?
time.
Okay.
We've got time. Yeah.
do you know the website, right? Or you have it?
Uh,
So if anybody else has questions in the meantime, while Gord is pulling that up, happy to try to answer. Sandra?
How long did that project take from start to finish?
Oh, good question. What do you think, Gord?
it took about,
Between 6 months and a year, right?
yeah, it took, well, we actually got, the client actually came to us in January, but we didn't actually start the project itself till September, and then it went through basically until the following September, so basically a year.
So, and I can,
Yeah.
Yes?
How do you determine the cost, or what's the
Yeah.
business
and
model?
now I get it.
Well, sorry. In this case, the client wanted it cheap, unrealistically cheap, and so it was a constant battle. He also wanted a lot of features on it. He wanted the seat post that adjusts and a lot of extra things in it. And it was a bit of an education process for us to work with him and get him to understand that, okay, you can have those features, but with those features come costs. And even in the end, I think he was surprised because we really did trim out a lot of stuff. But now that he's actually going to manufacture and really finding out, it's sort of hitting home a little bit more. I don't think he really heard us properly. So it's a constant struggle because you want all these design features, but it costs.
Sorry, I didn't.
Okay,
quite hear
so the question was, what kind of expertise do we have, and do we accept all projects, or do we reject some projects? So we have pretty diverse group, very strong mechanical skills, electronic skills, industrial design, a lot in the evaluation usability side. Probably, I think our biggest weakness is in the software interface stuff. So definitely we reject projects. We don't do things that we don't have the skills for, but sometimes we will pull in other people if we are missing just a component of that skill set. But the majority of our projects are probably around medical technology, assistive technology, though we do a lot in the automation, like the Purdy's stuff as well. So a bit all over the map. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Oh, one more question.
How do your clients find you? I think the person was from France.
Well, he's from France originally. He actually has his own company here in Vancouver, but he visits a lot in France, and that's where he saw this device. So, but word of mouth, I'm not quite sure.
We actually don't do a very good job at that. So if everybody can share the word with their friends that we're here. Sandra?
Well, we actually did a project inquiry contest on our website, on Arlo. So if anybody's interested in submitting a project, it goes to research website and then forward on to whatever area you feel it fit. And most of the inquiries are from
And we do get people like IRAP is really good at helping promote us. They when they get clients coming to them when looking for funding, IRAP will often send them in our direction because they know that we can help with various stages of the design.
I was going to say one other way to get us is research@bcit.ca, and we'll get it to the right person.
Thank you. Thank you, Johanne. Thank you, Gord.